So my name is Marcy Brandenburg. I'm the bioinformationist for the Todman Hill Sciences Library. And today I'm going to talk to you about the NIH Biosketch and SciENcv. So biosketches are an important part of the grant application package. And as is going to be seen throughout today's session, they have specific requirements that can make them frustrating to create and particularly to format. And so SciENcv can really help streamline the process and make managing biosketches much easier. Today's talk is going to focus on the basics of the biosketch and using SciENcv to create a biosketch. We have a mix of people online. I know we have research administrators and faculty and probably people that play a lot of other different roles and responsibilities. So today's session, the content is going to be useful for everybody, but certain parts of it may resonate more with you depending on your specific role and responsibilities. So for today's outline, I'm going to start with a background on the NIH Biosketch. I will give some background on SciENcv, and then I will do a brief live demo of SciENcv. With any remaining time, we can have a little bit of Q&A. I'll also be pausing throughout to ask if there are any questions. You can submit questions actually at any point in time via the chat box. My colleague Marisa Conti is online and managing the chat box. So she might be able to answer certain questions as you ask them. Others will be escalated up to me during the appropriate timing. In addition, you're welcome to ask questions after the webinar, and you can submit those to navigate-research@umich.edu. So at this point, I'm actually going to turn off my camera so that we can just focus on the slides. If I can figure out how to do this. All right, or not. I'm going to leave my camera. All right. I'm sorry, did someone say there was a question? Okay, I think someone maybe had their microphone on. Okay, so I'm going to move on to talk about some background on the NIH Biosketch. So this is an example of a biosketch. This is a dummy biosketch. It's not any particular person's, but this is an example of a biosketch in the actual format that is included in a grant proposal. I don't expect you to read this right now. And throughout today's webinar, I'm going to go through in more detail the specific components of the biosketch. But I just wanted to start just by giving you an idea of what a biosketch looks like. So a biosketch is a way for senior and key personnel on a grant to sort of explain their suitability for the particular role that they will be playing in the proposed project. Biosketches are required by many funders, including NIH and NSF. The format is slightly different, so you do have to know your specific funding agency. And today we'll be focusing on the NIH Biosketch. A biosketch is CV-like, but it is not a CV. So you cannot just take your CV, put that into your grant proposal and call it a biosketch. That does not work. Instead, biosketches are specific to the grant proposal. So the content of the biosketch, particularly the free text sections, which we'll be talking more about in the next few slides, but these are the personal statement and the contributions of science, those need to be tailored to the specific funding opportunity. A good analogy or a good way to think about this is that the biosketch should be tailored to a grant, the same way you would tailor a cover letter or a letter of reference to a specific job. Biosketches also have specific formats, and they have a page and length restriction. So these are the components of the NIH Biosketch. There's an area where you're going to enter education and training information. And then there are four main components. There's the personal statement, which is a free text field. And this is where the individual describes why they are well suited for their particular role in the grant or project. There's a positions and honors section where it's going to include current and or former jobs, awards received, professional memberships, things like that. There's the contribution to science section. This is another free text field component. And this is where the individual is describing their most significant contributions to science. And then there's the research support, which can be ongoing and or completed funding or awards. So if you are a research administrator or you work with a research administrator can become a delegate in SciENcv and help with certain sections of the biosketch. So for example, if the research administrator has the researcher's CV, they may be able to enter in the education training information, the positions and honors information. That's probably already on the CV and can be just transferred over to the biosketch. There's also, and I'll be talking more about this, but for certain sections, such as the personal statement and the contribution of science, you can attach a select number of citations, and a research administrator as a delegate can potentially help with that component too. Keep in mind, though, there are these free text fields, and so the researcher is still going to have to provide input and be involved. So I want to talk about some of the free text sections, the first being the personal statement. So the personal statement does need to be updated for each grant proposal. And the idea is basically to sell one's role about why they should, why they're being listed in the grant and what their role is going to be in the proposed research. It's really, why are they a good fit? What strengths does this particular person have for this specific proposal? If there are collaborators that one's going to work with, it's worth mentioning that in the personal statement. If there are specific things about the scientific environment that can be noted, these would be things like institutional support, physical resources. For example, say this is your biosketch and you are going to be relying on the expertise of the University of Michigan's Bioinformatics Core Facility. You could note that here in the personal statement. Similarly, if you personally have, this is your biosketch and you personally have technical expertise or specific expertise, say you're going to do your own bioinformatics analysis, this is where you would talk about that expertise that you have. If you've ever published under other names, that can be mentioned in the personal statement. And it's okay to talk about manuscripts in preparation. These are manuscripts that are basically still being written. You're still working on the initial draft. You can also talk about manuscripts that are under review. These are manuscripts that have been submitted for publication and are currently undergoing the peer review process. Now, as part of the personal statement, you can include up to 4 citations that go with that personal statement. These citations can be peer-reviewed articles, non-peer-reviewed articles, and/or research products. An example of research products are patents, data, software. Preprints also count as one of these research products. So a preprint is actually a draft of an article that's been made publicly available before undergoing the peer review process. You can, although I mentioned in the body of the personal statement, you can talk about manuscripts that are in preparation or under review. Those actually would not be included as one of your 4 citations. And I mentioned that you can have no more than 4 citations attached to the personal statement. It is okay to have fewer, so you don't have to have as many as 4. You just cannot have more than 4. This is an example of personal statement. This is from the NIH's sample biosketch. I do not expect you to read this right now. I'm not going to read it to you. We are making the slides available to you after the session, so you can access this at that time, or you can just go to the NIH's website on biosketches and download their sample. This is just to give you an idea. It's not, a page-long statement. So the other free text component of the NIH Biosketch is the contribution to science section. And this is really where one is demonstrating how their work has contributed to the larger field. So in the body of the contribution to science, it's important to use plain language and to be clear, concise, and organized. Keep in mind that whoever is reading this may not have the same expertise as the individual whose biosketches is. And so these contributions and the personal statement, everything should really be written in a way that is more understandable to a wider audience. So as part of the biosketch, one can have up to 5 contributions. It's okay to have fewer, so you could have a biosketch that only has 3 contributions to science, but you can have up to 5. And the order in which you list these contributions is up to the person who's creating the biosketch. NIH does not provide specific requirement and guidance on how these contributions are listed. So they could be listed in chronological order, by relevance. It's up to the creator of the biosketch. Each contribution can be no more than half a page, and that includes citations. So that is part of the reasons why it's really important to be very clear and concise when writing these contributions, because they can't be very long. And just like with the personal statement, it is okay to describe manuscripts in preparation or under review. So just like with the personal statement, you can attach up to 4 citations for each contribution. And it's okay to reuse the same citation multiple times if you so choose. So for example, you could have a citation that is used in the personal statement and then again in one of the contributions. Or you could have a citation that is used in multiple contributions. That's fine. Just like with a personal statement, these citations can be peer-reviewed articles, non-peer-reviewed articles, or research products. And although you can talk about manuscripts in preparation or under review in the contribution to science, in the body of the contribution, you're not going to include those as one of your 4 citations. So one thing that people generally ask when it comes to contribution to science is how to write these if someone is early in their career. And so some guidance for that is, say someone's early in their career and they just have maybe one publication, they can summarize the key finding of that paper and talk about its importance to the field in just one contribution. That's okay. You don't need to have 5 contributions to science. If someone has no publications, they can also still write contributions to science. They can write contributions describing their efforts towards someone else's project or someone else's paper. You know, say that individual did the literature review or helped maintain and manage the animals. They can discuss that and how that contributed to this other important project. So this is an example contribution to science. This is again from the NIH's sample biosketch. Again, I just show this to you to give you an idea how brief these are. It's really just a few sentences is all that's needed, because remember, the entire contribution, the text and the citation, can be no more than half a page. So in terms of more general formatting requirements for the NIH Biosketch, the entire Biosketch cannot be more than 5 pages. So that again is why we have to be very intentional about what we include and very concise in the various components. This is not a place to include graphs, figures, tables, anything like that. So some people, because in the different components where you can include citations, you're very limited in the number that you can include, some people want to include a full list of their publications. And so the NIH provides an opportunity to do that. It is basically just by providing a URL to that full list. And it does have to be a .gov URL. And you can do this using My Bibliography, which I will be mentioning in a moment a little bit more about. In terms of other formatting guidance, things like font size, font type, that's going to follow the same guidance as for the rest of the entire grant proposal. So NIH generally provides that for the grant as a whole. The Biosketch is going to follow that same guidance. So I mentioned My Bibliography, and I'm going to be mentioning that again. So I just want to pause briefly to mention a little bit more about My Bibliography. For anyone who's not familiar with My Bibliography, it's an online resource for storing citations, especially from PubMed. It's created and maintained by the same group that maintains PubMed. And if you do any type of grant administration, you can link the My Bibliography to an ERA Commons account. And ERA Commons is a resource for accessing and sharing administrative information throughout the life cycle of grants. And so if you link the ERA Commons with My Bibliography, you can also see publication compliance for the NIH public access policy. You can add citations to My Bibliography directly from PubMed, but if the citations are not in PubMed, you can also manually enter them or upload a file. And I do want to pause here to mention that the library has resources and expertise that can help with a lot of these resources, including My Bibliography. So if you have any questions about this particular resource, you can always reach out to me or any of my colleagues at the Taubman Health Sciences Library. All right, so I'm going to pause here to see if there are any questions to answer at this time.
Hi, everybody. This is Marisa. I'm Marcy's colleague at the Taubman Health Sciences Library. Just a reminder that you can put any questions you may have into the chat block. Marcy will take some questions during the talk. We'll also aggregate questions that we can't get to during or after the talk and respond to those via your email later. And as Marcy said earlier, the presentation is being recorded and all of the materials will be shared afterwards. So if you have any questions, go ahead and pop them into the chat box. Marcy, if you want to give it maybe a moment, we don't have any just now. I'll give it another minute and see if anybody chimes in.
Great, thanks, Marisa.
Okay, seeing none, I think, oh, I do have one that came in. Can Citations in the biosketch use the et al. Format for listing out authors.
Ah, that's actually a very good question. I'm not sure that it requires a specific format. I'm trying to think. I mean, I guess if you put them into, so if you put them into my bibliography and you use SciENcv, SciENcv is going to take care of that for you. And you'll be seeing that shortly because you're actually just going to check boxes next to the publications or citations that you want to include in your biosketch, and SciENcv will take care of the formatting. So outside of using SciENcv, I'm not sure. I imagine that's okay, but I'm not 100% sure. But I recommend using SciENcv, and then I don't think you should have to worry about it. Are there any other questions?
That was it for now. I will do some research while you continue with the presentation, Marcy, and if I can find any other information about using et al. In the author list for citations, I will share that later.
Thanks, Marisa. I appreciate it. All right, so I will move on now to talk about SciENcv. So SciENcv is a web-based tool created by the National Center for Biotechnology Information, or NCBI. This is the same group that maintains PubMed and also actually my bibliography. So the idea behind SciENcv is to provide a resource for preparing, updating, modifying, and maintaining your biosketches. So you can have multiple biosketches in your SciENcv account. So actually, one thing I recommend doing is to create a starter biosketch in your SciENcv account. And then when you have a specific grant proposal, you can actually start from an existing biosketch. So copy that existing one, and then you could just edit accordingly from there. So certain information like education and training, your jobs, those probably aren't going to change that often. So you could have that starter with that information filled in. Some people even recommend that you have starter biosketches for each area of expertise that you have. So for example, I've been written into grants for training and documentation. I've also been written into grants for visualization expertise. So I might have a starter biosketch, one for training and documentation, and one for visualization expertise. I may even have the personal statement filled out based on those areas of expertise. And then if I'm asked to provide a biosketch for a specific grant, I would just need to do some sort of a little less tailoring, or I would just need to go in and do some tailoring to match that specific grant proposal, but it'd be a lot less than starting from scratch. SciENcv allows you to pull information from external sources. This would be my bibliography, which we already talked about, ERA Commons, and then also ORCID. And if anyone's not familiar with ORCID, this is basically a unique identifier for researchers to ensure that one's professional activities are attributed to the right person. And you can have an ORCID profile, and so if you connect it with ORCID, SciENcv would pull information from that professional profile in ORCID. I want to mention again that the library does have expertise and experience and resources for all of these external sources, ORCID included. So again, if you have any questions after the fact about ORCID, my bibliography, etc., don't hesitate to reach out to the Tubman Health Sciences Library. So I mentioned early on that research administrators can become delegates for SciENcv, also my bibliography actually. And so delegates and linked accounts are both taken care of under the NCBI account settings. So that is the screenshot I have here. You can see I'm under the NCBI account settings. I'm logged in with a personal account. And you can see about 2/3 of the way down, it says linked accounts. And currently it shows none. So there are no linked accounts for this particular account. But you can see there's this change button here. So if you want to link up an ERA Commons or ORCID, you could do that here. You can also do that directly through SciENcv, and I'll show you where to do that. If you are already linked up to those accounts, it would show like ERA Commons, like your username here, I think, and same thing with ORCID. Below the linked accounts section is the delegates section, and you can see it says add a delegate. So if you are a research administrator helping your PI add you as a delegate, they would need to log into their account, go to NCBI account settings, and this is where they could add you as a delegate. If you are a delegate for someone else, I believe it will show that here too. Again, keep in mind there's a lot that a delegate can do in terms of the biosketch using SciENcv on behalf of a researcher, but because there are those free text fields, the researcher does still have to provide input. They're gonna have to provide the tailoring of the personal statement and the contributions of science to the specific funding opportunity. So in the slides, I do have a couple resources slides here that I just want to briefly mention. A colleague and I, the Tobin Health Sciences Library, created a step-by-step handout for creating an NIH Biosketch using SciENcv. And we are going to make that available to you along with the slides and the recording, and that where that is located will be provided to you after the workshop. In addition, the Tobin Health Sciences Library has some very useful research guides. I just put a couple on this slide. One is the NIH Public Access Policy, another is on ORCID. In addition, the Office of Research has some very useful resources. I also include a slide with resources outside the University of Michigan. So some of these are by the NIH, others are just other institutions. And then I also have a glossary slide. Again, we're making these slides available to you after the session. So that's why I'm just pointing these out to you. So the next thing I'm going to do is actually a brief live demo of SciENcv, but I will pause again in case any new questions have come in at this time.
So this is Marisa again. A reminder, if you do have questions, go ahead and pop them into the chat and we can address them live on the air, as it were, either during or after the presentation. We'll also compile the list and share out any answers to questions. I did look through the answer to the previous question I wanted to modify. So someone had asked earlier whether the citations in the biosketch could use at all in the author list. Presumably this might be of interest if you're maybe listed as an author on a clinical trial or on a paper that has a large number of authors and you're trying to conserve space to stay within the page limits of the SciENcv. I played around with my own, and what I found is that if you're using the My Bibliography feature to populate publications, particularly that are in PubMed, the citation format there is automatically going to include all of the authors. It's not going to do at all. As Marcy will show you in a moment, there's a couple of different export options for your completed SciENcv. One of those options is to export as a Word document. So if you're trying to conserve space, particularly with the author lists for some of these larger publications, one option would be to export the completed SciENcv as a Word document and then just make inline text edits there to use that all and compress your author list that way. Marcy, I think, is going to show briefly the My Bibliography product as it links into SciENcv. And My Bibliography will automatically populate an author's publications from PubMed, but it also has the option to allow you to manually input citations. So another workaround could be that you just manually populate a citation with the first couple of authors and et al. And go from there. I would encourage you, if you're going to compress an author list at all, be sure that you, as the researcher, if you're linking this as your citation, I would still make sure that your name shows. It just looks a little bit better if your name actually shows in. We had a question that comes in saying, what if you're under PubMed under different names? That's a really good question. And I think using something like an ORCID author identifier is a workaround to this. That would allow all of your publications to be aggregated together by a research identifier ID instead of having to worry about name variants. But as you're rightly pointing out, it doesn't do anything to mitigate the fact that you would be showing up in the author list in a different way.
So I will mention too that as a reminder for the personal statement, it did mention that if you've ever published under a different name, that is a place to note that. So I would make sure to note it there in that respect also. All right, do we have any other questions?
Nothing else. Nope. I'm going to add your answer, Marcy, into the chat log just for people that are following the Q&A in that way. Maybe give it another 30 seconds or so in case we have some questions come in, and then go ahead and carry on.
All right. Well, I'll just, before I move on, I'll just say, Marisa, thank you for that useful information and looking that up. That's interesting about the et al. That they don't automatically truncate that. And so that's very good to know, very good advice. All right, so in the interest of time, I think I'll move on to the SciENcv demo. So before I actually jump into SciENcv, I want to re-show this example biosketch that I showed at the very beginning, because this is actually the direct format that would be put into the biosketch with your grant proposal, but this is also the direct output from SciENcv. And so I wanted to show you that it really does output it in the format that you ultimately need to include. So with that, I'm going to go out of my slides and go into SciENcv. So this is the SciENcv homepage. I'm currently logged into NCBI, and I know that because at the top right, it has my username, which for this particular account is Biosketch Workshop. I'm going to click in a moment on this big blue button where it says click here to start. When I do that, it's going to flash a login page and then revert into my SciENcv account because I'm already logged in. But if you're not already logged in, it would stop on the login page, and there are many ways you can log in. You can use a My NCBI account, an ERA Commons account, ORCID. There's many other third-party options for logging in, even including, I believe, the University of Michigan.
Marcy, I'm going to cut in real quick. We have one request to just slow it down a little. I know we've got some time pressures, but you've got a lot of great information, and I think people are just trying to keep up. So one request to slow it down a little bit, and then.
All right, I will try to slow down. I apologize. We may run a little over time, so I apologize for that, but I will go a little bit slower, particularly for this live demo part. So I will go ahead and click on this big blue button. That's the login page. And now, because I was already logged in, it took me into my SciENcv account. So what I have here is I have 3 existing biosketches already in this account. Remember, I said that you could have multiple biosketches in one account. If I want to create a new document, I can click the Create New Document. And this brings me basically to a form for creating the new document. I type in my new document name. So I'll type in Biosketch Workshop. Then I choose my format. So for example, we're going to do NIH Biosketch today, but if I were doing an NSF Biosketch, I would go to that. If I selected NSF Biosketch, then SciENcv would bring up the appropriate format that is required by NSF. So then under choose a data source, I'm going to start with a blank document, but other options are to start from an existing document. And what you can see is this drop-down menu shows all the existing biosketches that I have in this account. This is where if you had a starter biosketch, you could just start from that biosketch. It would basically just, again, copy that biosketch and then you would edit accordingly. You can also, as I mentioned, pull in information from external sources. And so the examples right here are ERA Commons, ORCID, and actually NSF. So I'm going to go ahead and click Create. And this takes me into a sort of a blank biosketch. So you can see there's some header information at the top. You can see I've got my name section with a link here to click here to link ERA Commons account. So if you're not already linked up and you have an ERA Commons account, this is one place that you could do that. You just click this link, it'll bring you to ERA Commons, you log in, they'll be linked up. If you're already linked up, it'll have your ERA Commons username listed here. And then we have the education training, and then the 4 main components: the personal statement, positions and honors, contribution to science, and research support. And what you can see is next to each of these sections, like next to education training, it has this add one link. And next to personal statement has edit statement. And that's where you would go to start entering the information. So I'm going to show you what it looks like to enter the information, but I'm actually going to leave this blank biosketch for right now. So I'm going back into my SciENcv. You can see this new biosketch now shows up in my list of biosketches in this account. And I'm going to click on this sample biosketch instead. This is one that we've already entered some information into. So again, the top looks the same, but now the education training section has information filled in. And you'll see below that information, it says add another degree/training. If I click that, it brings up this form, and this is how you enter the information. So, you know, if I was entering a degree, I would put the school. I could choose from a large list of degrees. There's also an other options. So if your specific degree was not listed here, you can, that's fine, you can still work with that. You would put in the years or the dates, any other information you want to include, and then you would click save. Or if you did save and add another entry, you would save that and then bring up another empty form. So for each of these items here, basically filling out that form creates one line item. And so that's how you would go about adding or entering information for education and training. For the personal statement, I'm going to click edit statement. And what you can see is it's just a text box. You basically just enter your personal statement text in here, and you click the green checkbox to save it. Now remember, I mentioned that you can include up to 4 citations with your personal statement. So I'm going to click select citations to show you how this is done. When I click select citations, it has this My Bibliography tab. So what it has done here is it's pulling all the citations in My Bibliography and showing them right here. And all I have to do is check the boxes next to the ones that I want to include as part of my personal statement here. If I was linked up to ORCID, I'd have another tab for ORCID, and it would be the same thing. It would be pulling in information, the citations from ORCID, and I could just check the boxes next to those I'm interested in. Once done here, I'm going to, click Save Citations. Then for positions and honors, I'll go to add another entry under positions and employment. Again, it's just a form. So that's what's really nice, is that SciENcv is just giving you forms basically to fill out the information, and it takes care of all the formatting. Same thing for other experience, it's a form, and the honors, it's a form. So for contribution to science, so in this particular biosketch, again, this is a dummy biosketch, it's no one's real information. We have two contributions. You can see description citations for one contribution and description citations for the second contribution. And if I click edit section, you'll see that we have two tabs here, a tab basically for each contribution. And if I'll go to the second contribution, if I click edit next to description, it's just a text box, just like the personal statement. Click the green checkbox to save it. And for the citations, again, I can do select citations. It looks just like with the personal statement where it's pulling in everything from my bibliography. I check the boxes next to the ones I'm interested in. So I can save citations. The last thing I want to show just on this contribution to science section before, like, sort of why I'm still in this edit mode, is below the contributions, it says include link to complete list of published work in my bibliography. If you remember during the slides, I mentioned that some people want to include a full list of their publications. So this is how SciENcv allows one to do that. If I were to click this box, it would generate a URL, and it would be a .gov URL to the full list of citations in my bibliography. It basically makes my bibliography public. That does not mean that someone can go in and actually make changes to your my bibliography. It just means that someone with the link can see that full list of citations. Note that it is the full list of citations. There's no way to say, I only want to share my first 50. It doesn't work that way. It's going to be all or none. So that's the contribution to science section. And once done, I can click done. And then that's going to bring us to the last section, which is the funding and awards. And if I click edit awards, you'll see there are two tabs, an ERA tab and a user tab. And so if I was linked up with my ERA Commons account, it would pull in all the grants in the ERA Commons account. And just like with the citations earlier, I just check the boxes next to the ones I want to include. If you have funding that's not in your ERA Commons account, or you don't have an ERA Commons account, you can click the user tab and click add another award. And again, it's just a form. You fill out the form, and SciENcv will take it from there. So we've entered all of our information into our SciENcv account. Now we just need to download it. As Marisa mentioned, you can download as PDF, Word, or XML. This download option appears at the bottom right, also at the top right, actually, of your SciENcv page, while within a biosketch. So basically, I took this exact biosketch that I just went through with you. I clicked this Word link, and that is how I generated this, once it loads, this biosketch that I've shown you a couple times. This was the Word version. I just, shrunk it, just fit it all in one slide. But so what you can see is you enter information in a very user-friendly form interface in SciENcv. SciENcv does all the formatting for the rest of the output. So that is my webinar for today. I apologize if I ran a little over. Remember, you're welcome to send questions afterwards about the webinar to navigate-research@umich.edu. Any questions that you have about any of the any NCBI resources in general, including my bibliography or like ORCID, which is not an NCBI resource, but a resource of the library's expertise in, you can send any of those to ncbi-library-support@umich.edu. So with that, I want to thank everyone for attending. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to stay on a little longer to answer those.
Great. We do have a couple that have come in. One I was able to answer. One of the questions was, is there a need to have both the PMID or PubMed identifier and PMC ID, PubMed Central identifier, listed for a publication? The answer to that is yes, that both, or at least the PMC ID is absolutely required for NIH Biosketches, so do make sure that you include the PMC ID. And for citations that have those, if you're pulling those citations out of your My Bibliography, the PMC ID will be part of that citation format. Marcy, the second question is specific to the timeline about when will this be required by NIH? And I'm assuming that the question is referring to the biosketch format itself, which is actually, the format itself has been in place for a couple of years now. Marcy can amplify on this, but there's no actual requirement to use SciENcv to generate a biosketch. It's just a tool that's available that can help pull all of these pieces together and help out with some of the formatting questions. But Marcy, if you have anything more to add to that.
Yeah, so that would be how I would answer that too. I don't believe there's any requirement to use SciENcv for the NIH Biosketch. My understanding is that there might be a requirement either coming up, if not already in place, for actually the NSF Biosketch to use SciENcv. But as far as NIH is concerned, it's just a tool, as Marisa said, to help make life easier and to help you out and to make sure that you have the correct format. But I don't think there's any requirement to use SciENcv. The format that SciENcv outputs is the format that is required for just the NIH Biosketch, whether you're just doing that formatting yourself or using SciENcv to do the formatting. The format itself for the Biosketch would be the same. Hopefully that makes sense.
And Marcy, I've got another question that's come in. It says, to enter the grant support information, can it also be pulled from links? And I'm assuming that this would talk about, for an NIH Biosketch, links out of maybe ERA Commons, unless you know of a different source. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I'm not completely sure I understand the question. So if you're linked up with your ERA Commons, so if you have SciENcv and it links up with your ERA Commons, in that section for the awards, it'll pull in any grants that are in the ERA Commons, sort of just like it did with My Bibliography for the citations. So it'll have a list of all your sort of grants that are in that ERA Commons, and you can just check the boxes next to the ones that you want to include in that specific biosketch. I'm not sure if that answers the question. If not, then I might need some clarification.
I will let you know if I hear back. That may have been the answer.
Okay, great.
And at the moment, I am not seeing any new questions coming through.
Okay.
Yep, that answered the question. Thank you.
Awesome. And again, if anyone has any questions after this session, again, feel free to send them navigate-research@umich.edu. Any NCBI related questions can always be sent to ncbi-library-support@umich.edu. People are also welcome to just email me directly. That's fine too.
Great. I am not seeing anything else coming in through the chat, so I think we can wrap it up. Thank you for sharing those email addresses, and people can definitely feel free to reach out to either of those, and we're happy to answer any questions that we can.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you, Marisa, for your help with the chat. I want to thank the Navigate team for all the advertisement, promotion, and preparation involved in this. And I want to thank everyone for attending. And with that, I think we can end the session.